Once upon a time, if you read something that was written, it used to be somebody's very carefully considered thoughts. Whereas now there's an immediacy for just about everybody. And this is not just a case of perhaps CEOs or politicians or whatever, publishing or having their thoughts or policies made known, but just everybody in the general community is able to express the first thing that comes into their head anywhere, anytime. And not just in the public realm, but just, I guess, just generally. And this might be a question that perhaps a professor of linguistics may be able to best answer is playing English amongst the community getting worse? And is technology partly responsible for that?
It might be interesting to throw that to Annabel, because you're one of the early adopters of Twitter in your Twitter cast from Parliament. What are your thoughts about technology and the use of social media like Twitter?
Well, I'm all for it because it allows you to talk to an audience of people who self-select themselves as being interested in what you're saying. I mean, I think that's the great advantage of Twitter for journalists, and political journalists in particular. You know that you're not boring a general audience, But, there's different types of writing and different types of communication, I think. I think that political language, political oratory in particular, needs to have an enormous amount of work put into it. It shouldn't be lazy speech. It shouldn't be just cliches that you grab out of the air. I mean, a proper speech that creates a shortcut to a political end, a proper speech that changes people's minds or makes them consider something in a new light, has to have an enormous amount of work put into it. And a finished piece of writing is like that too. And I think that it's worth remembering the difference between off-the-cuff kind of communications, such as those that are encouraged by Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and your ability to be acquainted with exactly the kind of donut that your friend in San Francisco is presently enjoying or whatever. But a proper piece of writing, a proper enterprise that is going to change minds or make people think is a real piece of work, and I think we need to remember that.
Can I just add to that? I mean, that's true, and I'm happy to admit that I've used speechwriters. Because the reality is that if you're trying to write a good speech, I would work on a factor of 10 to 1. For every hour that you're going to speak, it's going to take you 10 hours to put the speech together. You've got speechwriters. For the most important speeches, you take a very heavy hand in it yourself, and in fact you write much of it. But you are literally sometimes delivering 10 speeches a day. You don't physically have the time to write the speeches, so you have to rely on that sort of resource.
It was interesting that you mentioned party leaderships and politicians and CEOs in the same breath, I think, because another means by which this weed has spread so far and entrenched itself so well is by the idea that the coverage of politics is to do with branding and rebranding. Mm-hmm. For some reason, we all accept that as we do rollouts. So suppose I was to be having dinner with one of you. You wish. and it would be like this. I'd say, well, try this. Can I pour you some of that? And send bewitch you with a few limericks. Things. Then I interrupt myself and say, by the way, I've been striving to make a good impression on you all evening. Would you mind telling me now if this is working or not? Because if it isn't, I'll have to try some other bloody tactic. You would think you were having dinner with a psycho. But with the party leadership abetted by the media, they keep saying, well, how is the rebranding going, Mr. Cameron? Do you think you've succeeded in presenting yourself as less of a toff and more of a man of the people or not? So that's a very good question. I was going to ask you how well I was doing in that precise way. This is cretinism. And it's very, very, very widespread. And it's borrowed from a business model that is consciously designed to deceive and indeed to rob people. And it's accepted as if it was as natural as breathing. And again, I hold my own profession the most culpable in this. Politicians can't be blamed if we are at their feet and at their disposal in that way. Rebranding, forsooth.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. And I'm sure we could go for at least another hour, hour and a half, and keep kicking this around. But as we started with a quote from Kevin Rudd, we may as well finish with a quote from Kevin Rudd.
Oh, no, I've got one.
Okay.
Does anyone here remember Jimmy Hoffa? The head of the Teamsters Union. They're still looking for him. He went away a long time ago. He was taken for a ride by the Sicilian business community. And it is believed that his last resting place is in the span of an arch of a freeway in the central New Jersey area. And his son, young James, ran for the leadership of the Teamsters Union a few years ago and looked likely to win. And he was asked at a press conference what his hopes and ambitions were. And he said, "I'd like to follow in my father's footsteps."
And on that note, will you please thank our panellists, Nathan Rees, Annabel Crabb, and Chris Hitchens.